Laura Kent stood under the blinding lights. Daniel Ross watched from two podiums away, and Evelyn Sharp moved quietly behind the scenes. Three names that would soon be linked not by a game show victory, but by one of the most cold-blooded murders ever to unfold in front of a live audience. The bright lights of the studio poured down on the polished floor, reflecting in dazzling flashes that made everything seem larger than life. The audience clapped in perfect rhythm with the lively theme music, their energy feeding into the high-octane atmosphere. Trivia Tower was no ordinary quiz program. It was a nationwide sensation where contestants could walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single night. People tuned in not just for the questions, but for the thrill of the competition, the drama of the scoreboard, and the unpredictability of who would rise or fall. That night's show would prove unforgettable, not for the prize or the champion story, but for a crime that would later haunt every person who had been inside that studio. Laura Kent, a 29-year-old middle school teacher from Ohio, stood at her podium under the glare of the cameras. With her neat ponytail and steady composure, she didn't look like someone chasing fame, but her eyes carried a quiet determination. She had told the producers she wanted to win enough money to pay off her student loans and maybe buy a small house. Offstage, she'd been friendly but reserved, avoiding the chatter and posturing of the other contestants. It wasn't that she was shy. Laura simply had her focus elsewhere. One person who seemed to notice her more than anyone else was Daniel Ross, a confident and sharply dressed real estate agent from Chicago. Daniel thrived on attention. He laughed loudly during rehearsals, bragged about his past business wins, and was the kind of contestant the producers loved, charismatic and entertaining. But behind his smile, he had a competitive streak that could turn sour. Laura had brushed off his attempts at small talk more than once, and tension between them began to simmer before the cameras even rolled. The first round of questions was lighthearted, designed to warm up the players. Laura answered quickly, her tone polite but assured. The audience began rooting for her as she climbed the scoreboard. Daniel, meanwhile, stumbled on a few answers early on, his grin faltering under the bright lights. By the end of the first segment, Laura had taken the lead, a fact that didn't escape Daniel's notice. He kept glancing her way, his expression tightening each time the scoreboard lit up with her name in the top spot. During the commercial breaks, Laura stayed at her podium reviewing the rules, sipping water, and keeping to herself. She didn't join in the casual banter between the others. A few of the crew members later recalled how Daniel paced in the corner, muttering under his breath, watching Laura with a look that wasn't just competitive. It was calculating. As the game progressed, the questions became harder, the stakes higher. Laura handled each one with precision, her confidence growing. The crowd erupted in cheers when she delivered the correct answer to a notoriously difficult history question that stumped the rest of the panel. The host, a seasoned entertainer, used to reading a room, could sense the shift. This was Laura's game to lose, and everyone could feel it by the time they reached the final round. Laura's lead was nearly insurmountable. All she needed was one more correct answer to secure the grand prize of $250,000. The cameras zoomed in as the final question flashed on the screen, and in a calm, steady voice, she gave the right answer without hesitation. Confetti rained from above. The audience rose to their feet, and the host clasped her hand, raising it in victory. Viewers at home saw the celebration. Laura smiling, shaking hands with the other contestants, and walking toward the backstage area as the credits rolled. What they didn't see was the quick, subtle moment when Daniel followed her down the hallway that led to the restricted areas behind the set. A security camera captured them disappearing around a corner together, their conversation out of earshot, their expressions unreadable. In that moment, the night shifted from triumph to tragedy, though no one yet knew it. For those watching on television, it was simply the end of another exciting episode. For those in the studio, it was the end of a long shoot and the promise of a few celebratory drinks before heading home. But for Laura Kent, her victory would mark the last moments she would ever spend in the spotlight, or anywhere at all. Within hours, the glitter of the game show stage would give way to a scene so grim that it would stain the legacy of Trivia Tower forever. You want me to now so the pacing stays consistent? The night ended with cheers still echoing in the studio corridors. Laura had walked off the stage with the grace of someone who wasn't used to the spotlight, but had earned her moment in it. Crew members were packing up equipment, the audience was shuffling out into the cool evening air, and the host was still backstage, chatting with producers about the next week's show. Laura had her prize paperwork in hand, the oversized check tucked neatly under her arm. To anyone watching, she looked content, maybe even relieved, that the competition was over. The hotel she was staying at was only a short drive from the studio, one of the mid-range places the show booked for out-of-town contestants. It was late by the time she arrived, and there was no sign of exhaustion on her face when she passed through the lobby. The front desk clerk recalled later that she greeted him politely, mentioned she had just been on television, and headed upstairs. A grainy elevator camera caught her smiling faintly to herself as the doors closed. The next morning, that same front desk clerk noticed something was wrong. Housekeeping had reported a guest who wasn't answering knocks on the door. Laura's checkout time had passed, and her room phone went unanswered. Security used a spare key to open the door, and within seconds, the cheerful mood of the previous night was gone. Laura was seated in a chair near the small desk, her head tilted slightly forward, her skin pale. A glass with a trace of dark liquid sat on the nightstand beside her. Nothing in the room looked disturbed. Her bag was neatly packed in the corner, her prize check lay untouched on the desk, and her phone was still plugged in, as though she had planned to use it again. Police arrived within minutes, sealing off the area while crime scene technicians began their work. The absence of any forced entry was the first clue that this wasn't a random act of violence. The door lock's electronic record showed no entries after Laura had returned from the studio, except her own key card swipe. Toxicology tests later revealed that her cause of death was cyanide poisoning. The poison had been ingested, and the most likely source was the drink in the glass found beside her. The concentration was high enough to act within minutes. Detectives began piecing together her last known movements. The security footage from the studio provided the most troubling lead. After the show ended, Laura had been seen walking toward a restricted backstage hallway. Daniel Ross appeared only seconds later, following in the same direction. Both vanished from the camera's view. There was no footage of them leaving together, but Daniel reappeared about 20 minutes later, looking composed, carrying nothing, and chatting casually with a crew member as he exited the building. Interviews with production staff painted a clearer picture. Several people confirmed that Daniel and Laura had disagreed during rehearsals, though no one could pinpoint exactly why. Others mentioned seeing them in tense, whispered conversations between segments. Daniel's explanation to detectives was that he had simply wanted to congratulate her and clear the air about their earlier disagreements. He denied giving her anything to eat or drink. The fact that her prize money and belongings were untouched ruled out a robbery. The theory of a personal dispute began to take shape. Investigators focused on the possibility that someone had poisoned her to settle a grudge or eliminate her for reasons not yet clear. The cyanide added another twist. This wasn't an impulsive act. It required access, planning, and the confidence to deliver it without drawing attention. The production company cooperated fully, turning over security footage, backstage logs, and prop inventories. That's when a new piece of information emerged. The show's prop department had previously used small, sealed vials of cyanide during a science-themed trivia segment months earlier. The vials were supposed to be locked in a secure cabinet, available only to authorized staff. But when the inventory was checked, one vial was missing. It wasn't clear how long it had been gone. The police had their first real lead. Whoever had taken that cyanide had done so with forethought, and the timing suggested it could have been connected to Laura's appearance on the show. The missing vial transformed the case from a puzzling tragedy into a targeted act of murder. It wasn't enough to make an arrest yet, but it tightened the scope of suspects considerably. The killer wasn't a faceless stranger. It was someone who had been inside the studio, someone who knew the routines, the security, and how to get close to Laura without raising alarm. The game show's glittering stage, once a place of excitement and applause, had become the starting point of a manhunt. Detectives knew the answer to Laura Kent's murder wouldn't be found in random guesses or luck. It would be uncovered piece by piece, the same way a contestant climbs the ladder on Trivia Tower. Only this time, the stakes weren't money or fame. They were justice for the woman whose victory had been stolen hours after she earned it. Oh, you want me to continue? In a in the same detailed style? Detectives worked methodically through the list of people who had access to the studio's secure areas. That list included producers, camera operators, stagehands, and a small group of prop department staff. It quickly became clear that only a handful of individuals had the clearance to open the cabinet where the cyanide was stored. Among those names was Evelyn Sharp, the assistant stage manager. Evelyn had been with the show for 5 years, known for her efficiency and attention to detail. She was trusted by everyone on set and had no history of disciplinary issues. When police questioned her, Evelyn admitted she had used her key card to enter the prop storage room the night before filming Laura's episode. She claimed it was to check on a lighting fixture that had been stored there temporarily, but there was no record of any work order for that task. The timing was too close to the disappearance of the cyanide to ignore. When detectives asked her where she had been on the night of Laura's death, she said she had gone home after the show and spent the evening watching old episodes of the series. No one could verify that alibi. While Evelyn was under quiet observation, the investigation team broadened their search. They dug into Laura's personal history, looking for anyone who might have a motive to harm her. Friends described her as kind, focused, and private. She had few enemies, but there was one notable exception: Victor Hale, a wealthy investor from New York. Court records showed that Laura had once accused him of defrauding her in a business deal. The case had been settled quietly, but it left behind a bitter rift. Investigators found no direct evidence linking Victor to the show, but the connection was enough to warrant further digging. Forensics worked on every item from Laura's hotel room. The glass beside her body yielded 2 partial fingerprints that did not belong to Laura or Evelyn. A breakthrough came when those prints matched Daniel Ross. This discovery complicated the picture. Daniel had publicly congratulated Laura, but now it appeared he had handled the very glass that had delivered the poison. Detectives confronted him again, but he insisted he had only moved the glass earlier in the day when they were both backstage, claiming he had passed it to her as part of a hospitality setup. There was no footage to confirm or deny this. The missing cyanide, Evelyn's suspicious storage room visit, Daniel's fingerprints, and Victor's potential grudge began to form a tangled web. Detectives suspected the murder was not the work of one person acting alone, but part of a coordinated plan. To test this theory, they followed the money. Evelyn's financial records revealed a $25,000 deposit into her account just 2 days before filming. The payment came from an untraceable offshore source, routed through multiple shell companies to disguise its origin. The transfer's complexity suggested someone with significant resources had orchestrated it. Investigators compared the transaction style to known financial maneuvers used by Victor Hale in past business dealings. While not definitive proof, the pattern was too similar to dismiss. Now, the working theory was that Victor had paid Evelyn to obtain the cyanide and insure it, reached someone who could get it to Laura without arousing suspicion. That someone, detectives believed, was Daniel. His proximity to Laura during and after filming, combined with his fingerprints on the poison glass, placed him in the most direct position to deliver the fatal dose. The motive for his involvement was less clear until a deeper look into his financial records revealed heavy debts, credit cards maxed out, overdue loan payments, and a series of failed real estate deals. A single payment from Victor could have been enough to push him into cooperation. The pieces were aligning into a disturbing picture. Victor, motivated by revenge, had arranged the plan. Evelyn, motivated by money, had provided the means. Daniel, motivated by desperation, had carried out the act. But the exact sequence of how the poison moved from the locked cabinet to Laura's glass was still unproven. Detectives needed something stronger than circumstantial connections. That break came when a prop department employee recalled a brief moment during rehearsal. Evelyn had been in the green room, sorting through drinks meant for the contestants. Daniel had stopped by moments later, joking with her before picking up 2 cups. The memory seemed insignificant at the time, but now it took on a far darker meaning. Surveillance footage confirmed part of the account. Evelyn and Daniel were indeed in the green room together shortly before the final round of filming. The camera didn't capture the contents of the drinks, but the timing fit perfectly with when the poison could have been slipped into Laura's glass. The investigation was now moving toward formal charges. The trail of money, the fingerprints, the missing cyanide, and the overlapping timelines built a compelling case. What had begun as a tragedy in the world of television entertainment was now revealed as a calculated assassination, planned with the precision of a business deal and executed under the glare of stage lights. Laura's final moments on Trivia Tower had been a public celebration, but behind that performance was a private betrayal carried out by people she barely knew. The "oh, you want me to move on" and with the same slow burn build. Detectives knew they were close, but the case still hinged on proving the connections between the three suspects. A judge granted search warrants for Evelyn Sharp's phone, laptop, and home. On her laptop, investigators found encrypted messages sent through a secure app known for disappearing chats. While most had been wiped, a handful of recovered fragments hinted at arrangements involving delivery and timing. The dates of these messages coincided with the days leading up to Laura's game show appearance. One conversation, although incomplete, mentioned confirmation after the win, suggesting that the plan had always been tied to her final night on stage. Meanwhile, forensic accountants continued digging into the offshore account that had funded Evelyn's sudden windfall. The financial trail was a maze of shell corporations, but persistence paid off. One of the shell companies had once been used to buy property linked to Victor Hale. This link was enough to bring Victor in for questioning. In the interview room, he presented himself as calm and amused, insisting he hadn't spoken to Laura in years and had no idea she was even on a game show. He dismissed the financial similarities as coincidence and claimed his lawyers handled all his investments. But investigators could sense the cracks. When asked why Evelyn Sharp's account had received a payment traceable to his network of companies, Victor fell silent for several seconds before demanding to speak to his attorney. The third suspect, Daniel Ross, was feeling the pressure as well. Police had discovered evidence of his financial struggles, past due notices, credit defaults, and foreclosure proceedings. The idea that he might have been tempted by a large payout fit perfectly with the theory. Confronted with the surveillance footage of him in the green room with Evelyn, Daniel stuck to his story that they were simply chatting. He claimed the drinks he took from the table were meant for himself and another contestant. However, the other contestant denied ever receiving one, and that contradiction added more weight to the mounting suspicion. Detectives worked to reconstruct the exact chain of events on the day of filming. Evelyn had access to the prop storage room the night before, giving her the opportunity to retrieve the missing cyanide. On the day of the show, she had been tasked with organizing the contestant refreshments in the green room. That was when Daniel appeared, lingering just long enough for her to pass him one of the altered drinks. The theory was that Daniel, knowing Laura's preferences from earlier in the week, made sure it ended up in her hands later in the evening. This wasn't just a crime of convenience. It was a carefully orchestrated delivery. What remained unclear was whether Victor had been monitoring the situation in real time or if he had simply trusted Evelyn and Daniel to carry out the plan. Investigators subpoenaed Victor's phone records, discovering multiple calls to a prepaid burner phone during the hours between the show's taping and Laura's death in the hotel room. The burner was later traced to a shop near Daniel's apartment, purchased in cash just days before the murder. This added a critical piece of evidence. Victor was not only financially tied to the suspects, but was actively communicating during the execution of the plan. As the picture became clearer, prosecutors began drafting charges. They intended to pursue Victor as the orchestrator, Evelyn as the facilitator, and Daniel as the direct perpetrator. But before they could move forward, they needed to close every gap in the timeline. That final piece came from an unexpected source, a rideshare driver. Reviewing transportation records, investigators found that Daniel had taken a ride from the studio to Laura's hotel shortly after filming ended. He stayed there less than 30 minutes before leaving. The driver remembered him because he seemed unusually quiet for someone dressed in a suit and wearing a contestant's name badge. This detail matched perfectly with the narrow window in which the poison could have been delivered to Laura's room. The driver's account, combined with the surveillance footage, financial records, and forensic evidence, created a chain so tight that even the best defense attorneys would struggle to break it. What made the case chilling was the way the murder had been staged within the celebratory world of television. Every step had been disguised under the normal movements of a production night, crew members handling props, contestants mingling, drinks being passed around. No one watching from the outside would have guessed that a deadly transaction was unfolding in plain sight. It'd be why the time the case was ready for arrest warrants, the once separate threads had been woven into a single, damning narrative. Victor had used his wealth and resources to initiate the plot. Evelyn had used her position to access and supply the cyanide. Daniel had used his proximity and charm to deliver it. It was a plan designed to look like coincidence, but the forensic and circumstantial evidence told another story. When police moved in, they took all three into custody within hours of each other. The press swarmed outside the courthouse as the suspects were let in for their initial hearings. Viewers who had once cheered for the game show now followed the unfolding legal drama with the same intensity. Trivia Tower had been a place where ordinary people dreamed of winning life-changing money. Now it was the setting for one of the most calculated murders the city had ever seen. Oh, you want me to ninth? So the ending delivers a strong, final punch. The trial began 6 months after the arrests, drawing national attention. Cameras lined the courthouse steps each morning, reporters jostling for position to capture every arrival. What had once been a story about a game show victory had transformed into a legal spectacle, with the prosecution presenting a case that read like a script from a crime drama. Jurors were told from the start that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated, multi-layered plot. The evidence would show that each defendant played a specific role in ending Laura Kent's life. Victor Hale was portrayed as the mastermind, the man with both motive and means. The prosecution outlined his history with Laura, including the failed business deal and her allegations of fraud. They argued that his decision to strike during her game show appearance was deliberate, a way to make her death look random and avoid suspicion. Evelyn Sharp was presented as the facilitator, using her access to obtain the cyanide and set the plan in motion. Daniel Ross, the prosecution claimed, was the willing hand, the one who had delivered the poison under the guise of camaraderie. The courtroom saw a parade of witnesses. Studio staff testified about Evelyn's unusual presence in the prop storage room and her role in handling contestant refreshments. Forensic experts explained how the cyanide matched the type stored by the show's prop department, tracing it directly to the missing vial. Financial investigators broke down the path of the $25,000 payment to Evelyn, linking it through layers of shell companies back to Victor's network. Surveillance footage was played repeatedly, showing Daniel following Laura backstage and later appearing in the green room with Evelyn. The most impactful testimony came from the rideshare driver. He described picking Daniel up from the studio, dropping him at Laura's hotel, and waiting outside while Daniel made his brief visit. That account fit perfectly with the toxicology timeline, reinforcing the theory that Laura had been poisoned shortly before her death. The defense teams tried to dismantle the prosecution's case. Victor's attorneys argued that financial similarities didn't prove involvement and that his contact with a burner phone was circumstantial. Evelyn's lawyers claimed she had been framed by poor record-keeping and coincidence. Daniel's defense suggested that someone else could have touched the glass, insisting his fingerprints were from earlier in the evening and had nothing to do with the crime. But the weight of the combined evidence, financial, physical, and eyewitness, left little room for doubt. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning their verdicts. Victor Hale was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Evelyn Sharp was convicted of conspiracy and accessory to murder. Daniel Ross was found guilty of first-degree murder and delivery of a controlled substance, resulting in death. The sentencing phase drew as much attention as the trial itself. Victor, the man who had once enjoyed the luxury of wealth and influence, was given life without the possibility of parole. Evelyn received 25 years in prison. Her spotless work record overshadowed forever by the role she played in facilitating the murder. Daniel, whose charm had once been his greatest asset, was sentenced to life without parole, his financial desperation now a footnote in a much darker story. In the months that followed, Trivia Tower resumed production but under a cloud of caution. Security was tightened, contestant areas were restricted, and staff underwent mandatory background checks. The green room was fitted with new cameras, and the prop storage room was equipped with reinforced locks and an inventory system that required dual authorization. Producers acknowledged the tragedy in interviews but emphasized that the show's spirit had to continue. Still, among longtime staff, Laura's episode became a whispered reminder of how quickly celebration could turn to catastrophe. Laura's family never accepted the cash prize she had won. Instead, the money was donated to a scholarship fund for aspiring teachers, her chosen career path now remembered alongside her name. On the anniversary of her death, the fund awarded its first scholarship, and the ceremony was held quietly, away from cameras, in the small Ohio town where Laura had grown up. For viewers, the story became one of those rare true crime cases that seemed almost fictional in its complexity. It had all the elements of a thriller: jealousy, betrayal, greed, unfolding in a setting meant for entertainment and joy. The idea that such a crime could happen in front of a live studio audience, hidden behind the smiles and applause, unsettled millions. In the end, justice came not from a dramatic confession or a sudden twist, but from the painstaking assembly of details: the fingerprints, the bank transfers, the camera footage, the recollections of a driver who had simply been doing his job. It was proof that even the most carefully constructed lies could unravel under the weight of the truth. And as the credits rolled on the trial of Victor Hale, Evelyn Sharp, and Daniel Ross, the bright lights of Trivia Tower shone on, though they could never erase the shadow of the night Laura Kent's victory turned into her final chapter.